Welcome to the Deeper Into Movies podcast. My name is Stephen T. Hanley. I'm the founder and lead curator of Deeper Into Movies. We're a pop-up cinema based in London and New York. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by British filmmaker Mark Jenkin, Cornwall in the house. And Mark, you may know from his breakout movie Bait. He's back with a new, deeply sinister folk horror film, ENYS MAN, and this really establishes him as a unique and fascinating and deeply strange filmmaker whose film techniques are just wild. No one's making films like this guy now. So I was really excited to get into it with him and talk about his process. This was a cool chat. I saw ENYS MAN last week, and then I shot my pals at BFI a message and said, I'd love to chat to Mark. Can he do the podcast? And they said, you're a bit late. He's kind of wrapped up press. And then I got a message yesterday that said he'll do tomorrow at 11 a.m. So I had zero time to prep. I hope you can't hear that in the pod. Here's me and Mark Jenkin. So, you grew up in Cornwall?
Yeah.
What kind of teenager were you? What were you into?
Oh, God, what a question. What kind of teen? Well, in my early teens, I was, my big passion was making model railways. And I mention that because I think now, looking back at it, that's how I started on my love of making films. It was a natural progression from one to the other. So I think that was how I would identify myself certainly as a young teenager. Then I got into filmmaking when I was a little bit older through photography.
Did you have your own 35mm camera? What was your first camera?
Yeah, I had it was here actually. It's not. It's in my studio now. I had a Pentax Program A 35mm stills camera that my dad bought me when I started doing a photography A level. I was doing a biology A level and I was rubbish at it. And I used to skive off to lessons and go and hide in the dark room at the college. And through hiding in the dark room during biology lessons, I learned how to print photographs. But the photography tutor said to me one day, he said, "You're not actually on this course, are you?"
How long did it take him to work out?
Well, quite a long time, because I was always in the dark room, so I don't think he ever really knew who I was. I was hanging around with a mate of mine who was on the course.
Right.
But I'd fallen in love with printing images, and he said, "Well, if you're going to hang around down here all the time, you should get on the course." So I got on the course, and I think at that point I'd really found my passion. And so my dad bought me a camera, 35mm camera, and I just started shooting black and white stills and printing them. And I was never happier than in the dark room, listening to music, printing pictures. And I used to print like photo stories. Used to try and create narrative out of these images that I was printing. And eventually the other photography tutor said to me that you're basically recreating moving images by trying to create lots of different stills. So he advised me to shoot Super 8. And so I went and got myself a Super 8 camera and started shooting Super 8. And that's where I am now, really, still shooting Super 8.
What kind of photos were you taking? Was it still life or people or?
No, mostly people and landscape, but trying to imply some sense of narrative. But I mean, I was sort of 18 years old, so it was pretty existential, pretentious crap.
You've got to go through that. I always find, even when I look back at all my old student films and photography and stuff, you've got to go through all that. Even when you're just copying other, like in my teenage years, all I was want to do is trying to copy one takes from Scorsese films. But
Yeah, I mean, I was always into. I was never into that sort of cinema really. I was always much more into experimental stuff. So I was ripping off some pretty existential art cinema, but not really doing it justice.
no, but it's kind of even fun when you copy something and it sort of looks like who you're trying to emulate.
Yeah, when you end up really perfecting the process as well and establishing your own processes. So it's all, I think forging things is a good way of learning.
How are you discovering films? And what kind of things were you into? You said you're into a lot of art films.
Well, Channel 4 was a big thing. So being on the dole in North Cornwall and sitting up late at night watching Channel 4 was a way of discovering a lot of stuff. Like once I'd left college, and also just a really great cinema in the town that I grew up in, the Regal in Wadebridge in North Cornwall, which was showing mainstream stuff, but it was somewhere we always went. Every Friday night we would go to the cinema, and just watch whatever was on. It didn't really matter. So I did have that sort of exposure to mainstream cinema alongside the stuff that I was kind of finding on Channel 4. There was a Derek Jarman season in the early 90s that was on, and I discovered his stuff and got really into The Garden was the first thing that I saw that he did. And then I remember then getting a train up to London to go and see a print of The Tempest in NFT1 at the BFI. Amazing. And just going up to London on my own and watching The Tempest. And that was my introduction to the BFI and to the NFT, which was then really exciting to have that open up in front of me. And, I didn't go back again for years afterwards, but it was just sort of exciting to think that there was this place in London that was just dedicated to showing cinema. So it's great now that I'm sort of hosting my own events there. Feels
sure, yeah.
Gone full circle.
And what were you listening to? You said you were listening to a lot of music in the darkroom. I was wondering what. Yeah,
well, my sister's taste in music, she's 4 years older than me, so I was listening to things like Pixies and The Cure, Half Man, Half Biscuit, The Smiths, that kind of stuff. And then it would have been the early 90s, so things like, I don't know, it was like when the Manchester stuff was all kicking off, so Stone Roses, Happy Mondays, Paris Angels, particular favourite of mine, and also hip hop. 3 Feet High and Rising was a big album for us.
Were you making music as well? I know you score your stuff, so I was wondering.
Yeah, trying to. I was in a band at college. I spent about the last 40 years trying to learn how to play the guitar, but I played in a band, sang really badly in a band when we were at college, but never played live, just used to rehearse the same 4 songs over and over again week after week until we split up due to musical similarities, as to quote a Paul Heaton phrase.
That's a great line. When did you move to London? You became a promo producer in London. Was that for music videos?
It was actually sort of film promos for Channel 5. So it was TV film trailers of terrible films. We were given an open brief to cut our own trailers for, so they could be quite mocking of the films because they were sort of bad films that had been seen a million times, and just Channel 5 just desperate to get an audience for their movies. So that would have been beginning of 1999. I moved there from Bournemouth. I'd been at college. I'd been at university studying a production degree in Bournemouth from 95 to 98, and then I worked on a couple of building sites in Bournemouth. Didn't really want to move to London, so I was working on building sites and trying to make my own stuff. And then eventually I moved to London in 1999 was there till 2002. Yeah, editing film trailers for TV mostly.
How was that? Was that tedious or was it kind of fun?
No, it was brilliant. It was really good good training. We'd cut a couple of trailers a week, so really sort of picking apart a film and working that and pulling out the key elements of it in order to reinvent it, really. So I watched a lot of films and a lot of bad films and cut a lot of trailers and learned how to edit and learn different editing systems inside out. So it was a really good, very good training. And yeah, I really loved it. I just wanted to get out of London, though. That was the thing. I think once I'd got out of Cornwall, it was a case of working out how I could move back to Cornwall and be sustainable here.
Right. You don't like, was it the city? What was it about London that
yeah,
wasn't for you?
I'm just a Cornish kid, really. Just bit overwhelming. Really miss the sea. Really miss the people. And I do, I'm back up in London in a couple of days' time for a few days. And I love London now. But then I think because I had no idea of how I was going to get out of London, that was scary. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, oh God, is this it now? Am I just going to be in the city for forever? So I'm very determined to get home.
And when did you begin teaching?
I did a bit of teaching at the Falmouth University when I moved back to Cornwall. At first it was just a really good way of making some good money because the university was the best paid job that was available within Cornwall. And so at first it was just going in and sitting in on sort of graduation film crits. And then I just really enjoyed it. And so I ended up doing more and more. And actually, rather than just doing crits, did a bit of teaching as well and mentoring students. And it just really, just kept my mind sharp, really, at the university. I ended up almost being full-time there for a couple of years when I wasn't doing my own work. But then had to kind of give it up again as my work picked up. But it was... yeah, it's good. I miss it. I'm still associated with the university. I'm a professor there, so I'm still very much linked to the university, but I do much less sort of hands-on teaching now. I
went to Southampton Institute for film school, which was we had Ken Russell as a mentor.
Yeah,
which was pretty wild. I have a weird memory. I remember we had to come in and pitch our films, and I had this weird kind of. I was really into Chris Morris, and we had this weird kind of, I said it was like Chris Morris meets American Psycho idea. And Ken was so fucking offended. He got really, I think he was really drunk. And then he was like, this film is awful, get the fuck out. And I was like, okay. And then they were like, Ken, you can't kick people out of the class. You need to hear them out. And he was like, I didn't like that film. Next.
I've never been. So what years were you there?
I was 2001, 2002.
Right. Okay. I was going to say, because I had friends at Southampton and we used to hitchhike up. We used to save up our dole money for a month and then hitchhike up to Southampton and hang out for sort of a long weekend. Southampton University. So I've got some fond memories, patchy fond memories of Southampton. But yeah, never came across Ken Russell.
Oh, it was wild. And then there was another task where for your graduation film, you have to come in and pitch.
Mm.
And it was Ken and two other lecturers who just play the role of real kind of hard-ass film execs who are just going to punch holes in your film. And it was really sadistic. It was really cool. It was so hard just to come in, because they took one of the big boardrooms.
Yeah,
up on the top floor of the university, and you have to come in, and it was almost like some sort of, I don't know, Simpson Bruckheimer type of kind of, what's the 10-second pitch, kid? Come on, you're boring me. What is it? And I was like,
so what? But it was made clear they were sort of playing a role, was it?
Kind of. Brutal. It was really brutal. It was really. Yeah. I came out really upset. I don't know when you're just coming in there with your kind of. Your film, you're not very confident in what you're saying, and I remember I really fucked up. I said, I had this idea where it was someone who had to hand himself in the next day, and he was just trying to see some friends before he goes in for something quite minor.
Yeah.
And I said something like, he's going to hand himself, but it's going to feel really real. In the sense I'm, kind of leaning towards the kind of British realism of like Mike Leigh or something.
Yeah.
And they were like, of course it's meant to look real. That's what cinema's fucking about. And I was like, let's wrap this up.
Yeah.
It was way too tough.
That's not what cinema's about.
No. This episode is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema. Iconic directors, emerging auteurs, Mubi always has something new to discover. Every film is hand-selected. I've been a Mubi subscriber for years. Okay, I love doing this. Let me browse the Mubi UK platform and pick out free movies for you to watch. Beach Rats from 2017, starring the great Harris Dickinson, Eliza Hittman's debut, which, how did I pitch it when I was talking about it the other day? An aquatic Larry Clark movie. There you go. Number 1. 2, I've got to keep talking about it. After Sun. This film is beautiful. It's deserving all the Oscar buzz. Believe the hype. And the mark of a great filmmaker. Great debut. Really excited to see what she does next. Okay, final one. Mysterious Skin by Greg Araki from 2004. Absolutely haunting and beautiful coming-of-age story. If you know Greg's movies, you know to expect a beautiful shoegaze soundtrack. And Robin Guthrie from Cocteau Twins did the music. What a great movie. I saw that at the London Film Festival when it came out, and I ran over to Greg Araki to get my DVD signed and talk to him. And I was just gushing, and then I looked over, and the very handsome Joseph Gordon-Levitt was looking on at me like, wow, this guy's a real fanboy. Deeply embarrassing memory. Okay, there we go. There are my free picks. You can try Mubi for free for 30 days at mubi.com/deeper into movies. That's mubi.com/deeper into movies for a whole month of great cinema free. Watch my recommendations and find a bunch more. There's always great stuff on there. So was there a particular moment where you kind of landed on your aesthetic and you're shooting on 16mm, developing your own film? How did this, I'd say your trademark look and signature come about?
Well, no, I sort of lost track of how I wanted to make films by being sort of dragged along by the technology. So I started out shooting Super 8 because that was at a period of time where that's what you did. If you were shooting films and you had no money, you shot on Super 8. There were video cameras. There was like big VHS cameras and maybe like Video 8 analog video cameras, but they weren't sort of as the thing to shoot proper films on. You shot it on Super 8 if you wanted to shoot film. So I started shooting Super 8, and then when I was at Bournemouth studying production, it was when we were shooting on things like Beta SP cameras, and then and then we were recoloring it and grading it to make it try and look like film and that kind of thing. But then the big revolution was that the mini DV cameras came out, and I remember me and my friend Steve going from Bournemouth University and getting the bus back up to the NFT again, and to the Museum of the Moving Image, which was on the South Bank at that time, and they had on a plinth, as you walked into the museum, they had the first mini DV camera there, and I remember we went up to look at this mini DV camera before it had been released, and that was the start of it, really, of low budget filmmaking for me, was getting hold of a mini DV camera. And I did shoot a 60-minute film in 1999, which was finished in 2001, which was shot on a mini DV camera, which I hired. It cost me £1,000 to hire it for a fortnight.
Is that Golden Burn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I made that film, and then I was really just sort of, I thought the mini DV camera is kind of revolutionary, and it was revolutionary for low budget filmmaking, and I loved the aesthetic of it. But then I progressed on to sort of more. I followed the technology, really, and when new cameras came out, I moved on to new cameras. So then it was like the sort of mini DV HD cameras and I used them, and then I ended up getting a DSLR and working on a DSLR, and then started shooting stuff on the higher end high HD cameras and working with cinematographers, DPs, and it wasn't really questioning what I was doing in terms of workflow. But I then there was a point where I thought, actually, I'm really lost interest in making films. I was so removed from the camera and from the technology because I couldn't keep up with it, and it was sort of like technicians and people who sort of had the creative control in the projects I was working on. And then, so I decided to I hadn't shot Super 8 for a long time. I decided to buy a Super 8 camera, a new old Super 8 camera. And also I thought this would be a good time to shoot some Super 8 because all the labs were closing. It looked like Kodak were going to go out of business. So I thought, I'm going to get a Super 8 camera, buy a Super 8 camera, buy a few rolls of film and shoot some Super 8 before it dies. And it just reignited everything for me in terms of my love for film. And because the labs were closing, I bought black and white film, and I started hand processing my own black and white. And then I bought some Ektachrome as well, and bought a processing kit for that. And so processed some color reversal film. And I also went and did a couple of workshops at a place called Nowhere, who were in Bethnal Green at the time, like an artist's run film lab, and learned how to use the Bolex 16mm camera and hand processing black and white 16mm. It just demystified it all for me. And I said, actually, I can do all of this myself, and started making some short films in that way, which then got noticed by festivals, probably because they were some of the only films that were being shot on film at that time. This is about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, I was still developing narrative, longer form projects, but in a more conventional way. But they weren't really going anywhere. So at one point, I just thought, what if I combine my handmade filmmaking techniques to these narrative scripts that I've got? Maybe I can re-energize those projects and re-energize myself. And so I made a film called Bronco's House, which is a 44-minute long film, which was like the precursor to Bait. It feels a bit like a dry run of Bait now, but it wasn't intended to be at the time. It was a standalone film, 44-minute long. And that's where I got to, really, just combining those narrative screenplays with what was perceived as a more experimental, hands-on, homemade way of producing the films.
What was the first mini DV? Was that a Sony camera?
The one that was at the South Bank that we went to look at, I think it was a Sony, like an upright, almost looked like a book. Don't know what it was, a Sony 1 or something. And then the one we shot Golden Burn on was the VX1000 with the top handle on it.
That's what I've got. Yeah, I remember watching Jackass and things like that, and all the skate videos, and they had with the top. Yeah, that's because they used the top handle for all the skate videos. I was like, that's so. And then I bought Sony PC120, the tiny ones about the size of an iPhone.
Yeah,
with the flip out screen, because that's what I read. Chris Cunningham was using that. on loads of
Yeah.
projects. So I was like, I want that, because then obviously my films are gonna look exactly like his, and that's not the case.
Yeah,
But
I've got one of those. I bought one of those Sony cameras not that long ago. I bought it on eBay for like 75 quid with about 6 batteries and about 20 tapes and stuff. And
amazing.
I just want I want a camera like that, because maybe one day I'll shoot another mini DV film, maybe.
But I really think the Sony PC-120 has got a really weird grain that I remember when I had it at uni, everyone was always mistaking it for 16mm.
Yeah.
And there was that really interesting phase in DV, especially like when Michael Mann's Collateral and things like that now just have a completely alien aesthetic, where it's not film, it's not digital, it's almost in this kind of
That's what I was going to say. It's a real
netherworld,
analog digital format, because it's digital, but it hasn't got the sharp edges. It's the color space is really great. The noise looks like grain.
Yeah.
And you get, in tape, and shooting on tape, it's like shooting on film, because it's linear. You get those weird juxtapositions between what you shoot something on it and then leave it for 6 months, and you pick it up again and start shooting again. There's a weird moment where it goes from one scene to the next, which you don't really get on sort of those card formats where every shot is separate and exists in its own little space. So I do think we lost something when we moved away from tape.
Yeah, I like that tape that it's burnt, it's burnt onto the tape. It's there with SD cards. I always have anxiety anytime I'm exporting anything that is this going to corrupt? Is this going to, while tape just felt a lot more solid to me.
Yeah.
So with Bait, I was just so curious to your process, because you record without sound on a hand crank camera.
Yeah.
How long are the mags on that? How long can you shoot for?
It's about 27 seconds.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, each shot is about 27 seconds, because you wind the spring, and then the spring lasts 27 seconds. The actual film is about 2.5 minutes long. So yeah, you can get like 5 27-second shots on the roll, but most of the time I'm shooting much shorter shots, much more fragmented in the way that I shoot.
So how much planning do you have? Do you storyboard everything meticulously?
No, don't storyboard anything. I shot list stuff, and I have a very clear idea in my head of what's needed for a scene. But because I'm the writer and the DP and the editor, I don't tend to write a lot of it down. It's all stored in my head. And I don't shoot coverage. I just shoot the fragments that I think I'm going to use in the edit, which normally means I'm a bit short of stuff within the scene when I'm editing it, which forces me to be a bit more experimental and a bit more non-linear.
I guess you just have your egg timer in your head of how long you can take over for on a scene. And
yeah, I mean, most of the time I know it's going to be way under, because it will just be short little fragments that I'll be shooting. If I'm going to shoot something where I need to get the full wind, the full 27 seconds, then I'll block it and time it to make sure we've got enough time. And I'll use a stopwatch on occasions when it gets very close to the limit.
And is this a Bolex you're using? Yeah,
Bolex H16 SB. So it's a bayonet mount Bolex. So one of the more modern ones. I think it's like 1975, 1976 it was made.
And how many do you have? How reliable are they? Are they just workhorses?
Yeah, I mean, I get them serviced before we shoot each film, but I've never, touch wood, been let down by them yet. I've got two. I've got an RX4, which is a 1960s camera, which is the turret mounted the lens mount system, and I use that as a second camera. So I've got two, and then I've just been given another one which needs to be really overhauled. It's a bit knackered, but so I should have, by the end of this year, should have 3 that are operational. But I think on ENYS MAN we only shot one shot where we used 2 cameras, which was the stunt, which we used 2 cameras because it was just an expensive setup. Whereas most of the time I'm just shooting one camera.
And how's it for the actors when you're working with them to, how long is it for them to get into the rhythm of your process and unique style?
I don't know. I think it's pretty straightforward because I think every film's different. I think we think there's a sort of homogenized way of making films, but I think each director works in a slightly different way.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't record any sound. I don't record any dialogue on location. But it's not like the actors are not saying anything. They're doing it as if they are being recorded. So
if it's not a boom there, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think that's any different. I've got a very pared back way. I like performers to perform with as little performance and theatricality as possible. But yeah, I mean, and I work with a combination of actors and non-actors. So I think that I always think the actors are going to be kind of freaked out by the way that I work or surprised by the way I work, and then the non-actors are not going to know any better. But I think what happens is the actors are incredibly versatile and they like to be challenged. So doing something a bit different, at least they tell me that they enjoy it. And the non-actors, I think the opposite quite often. They have preconceptions about how something's going to be done and it's not done in that way. But then they get very used to it. But I've had people who've been in my films who, like an actor who was in Bait, who then went off to do another film that was shot in a more conventional way. And I think he was quite surprised at how that person worked, because he said, "Oh, yeah, they actually recorded the dialogue while we were filming."
What are they like? Yeah,
yeah. And I was like, "Yeah, that's normally what happens." But then then we had an actor who on Bait, which is the previous film, who came along. He'd just been doing a BBC, like primetime BBC TV series. He just finished shooting, and he came onto our set, and I said, "Look, we don't record any dialogue. We do it all later." And he said, "Well, yeah, I mean, that's what we do most of the time on the thing that I've just done. We ADR all the dialogue anyway." So, I think there's preconceptions about the way things should be, but actually most people, everybody's got a different way of working, and the actors are incredibly versatile on the whole.
I know you said you have to lip read all the dialogue in post.
Yeah.
And then you do a version where you lay a track of you doing all the voices, and then a final pass where I'm guessing you get the actors to come back in and record their lines.
Yeah, I mean, on Bait, because there were lots of characters, there was a version of the film where I'd done all of the dialogue for all the different characters, just because I needed the dialogue to be in there for me to be able to edit. On the new one, on ENYS MAN, it was slightly different because there's far fewer characters and much less dialogue. So there may have been a couple of lines that I dropped in my own performance, but it was actually it wasn't such a big logistical undertaking getting all the actors back in, because it was mostly Mary came in and did hers. So it wasn't so much that way with this last film.
With the way you record, you've got total freedom to create your sound design, but also are you just making insanely difficult technical logistics and nightmares for yourself, or is this all part of the fun for you?
No, I never let it become a nightmare, because the sound, I don't have any sound to start with, which I think is the best creative starting point, because all you do is work with a blank canvas. Whereas quite often, if you're working with location sound, especially on a low budget, the first thing you start doing is having to mend all the things that are wrong with it, which I think is a really bad creative starting point. So, trying to remove the sound of an aeroplane over a dialogue track, or the sound of a fridge that you couldn't switch off in a location or something like that. So I like not having any problems. I just have sort of challenges, creative challenges to face. And I don't let it become a nightmare, because if it's something too complicated or too difficult to recreate, then I'll completely reject the realism of it and go in an abstract way.
Right.
So there's some things that I can't recreate sound-wise in the studio, and I know straight away that I have to have a different approach to it, and they're the bits that end up being the more interesting parts of the film, I think.
Is it you just going out with a portable recorder and picking up sounds, or?
Yeah. I'll revisit the locations without the distraction of a camera or having to think visually, and I'll pick up different sounds. I'll also use like sound effects libraries, and I'll grab stuff from here, there, and everywhere really, and start mixing it and combining it in new ways. But it's a very relaxing part of the process for me, because it's just me with a microphone and a recorder and a pair of headphones going back out into the landscape, and just, you know, it's a very peaceful, calming, and ultimately cheap part of the production process.
And you develop your own film?
I do. I didn't on this one. The lab processes, because it was color. It's a lot more technically challenging to develop the color negative. The chemicals are not particularly nice, and it's very temperature dependent. So it would have taken a long time to do this amount of color rushes. I mean, I've processed my own color films plenty of times in the past, but mostly with shorter films. So yeah, we gave Kodak the privilege of doing all the processing on this one.
And what film stock was this? It was so beautifully saturated on ENYS MAN.
It's Vision 3, so it's just the Kodak color neg 50D, 250D, and 500T, and then we really pushed it in the retiming in the post production. So really pushed the color and pushed the grain. Wanted it to sort of look like almost like an old sort of Kodachrome film.
Yes.
But it's very difficult to replicate that. But yeah, just push it as far as we can before it, you know, just to the point where it's almost starting to fall to pieces. Saturation's almost too far and the grain's almost too far.
What were you watching for inspiration for this film? In terms of maybe the horror elements of a amazing kind of weird sense of tension and doom that you have in this film.
I don't know. I suppose nothing particularly specific. It's just that's the sort of film that period of films is the sort of period I'm interested in, that 1970s almost horror stuff. I mean, I just at the moment been reading about The Shout, Skolimowski's The Shout from 1978. I think that's a big influence on me without knowing why, really. The sort of almost horror film, which I think is a phrase that Kim Newman first coined.
What else is an almost horror film? I'm wondering what else falls into that genre, do you think?
Something like Symptoms as well.
So have I seen that? I don't think I've seen that.
Larraz, Spanish director, but British film. Yeah,
I have. Yeah, this got re-released recently, I think.
Yeah, I just programmed it at the BFI as part of a season of films supporting the release of ENYS MAN. You know, and a lot of the sort of British kind of, I mean, I suppose they are outright horror, but the sort of ghost stories for Christmas stuff, the Lawrence Gordon Clark films, some of the Children's Film Foundation films, some of the creepier Children's Film Foundation films of the 70s and 80s. And you know, some more outright sort of horrific stuff, like the public information films as well, that we were exposed to as kids.
Oh my God, yeah. Like the firework movies, the firework ones I remember, and the screams of horror of crossing the road, where you see the reaction shot of someone getting hit by a car, and you just hear all the screaming and the
flying your kite underneath overhead power lines and getting your frisbee back from a substation, and
which kind of almost
so they're horror, but they can't, you know, because they were designed for kids, they weren't able to show the horror.
No, just hearing the screams where it's like, "Oh God, Jenny, no!" It's like,
and then a freeze frame.
What the hell happened to her? You know, that was Well, I suppose which kind of the final one about is like watching Freds or something in the 80s, which was just absolutely horrific and terrifying.
Watching what? Sorry,
Freds.
Oh yeah, which we watched that at school.
Dude, it's one of the most horrific things I've ever seen. It's So haunting.
Yeah,
And so realistic in like the countdown of like day one, you know,
yeah,
hospitals at capacity, day two,
yeah. I mean, and
no
that
power.
really is a built-in foreboding, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also like Peter Watkins, The War Game.
Oh yeah, he's amazing. I just watched his Edward Munch
Oh yeah,
Edvard Munch 4 hour
yeah,
cut, which is just spectacular.
yeah, yeah. Impossible to take your eyes off that, isn't it?
So beautiful, it's just incredible. Also, kind of one of those how the fuck did that get made or funded type of movies, which is
Yeah. Well, I think, it's good like a 4 hour, it's pictures like a 4 hour documentary. You think, oh God, I'm gonna have to be, really on it to get through this. And then it just starts, and it's so compelling, the atmosphere of it. And I read, I wrote my dissertation on Peter Watkins and was I met him and was just completely fascinated and addicted to his work. And then, my other big love is Robert Bresson films.
yeah.
And then I read something quite recently saying about how much Watkins was influenced by Bresson, and I'd never made that connection. I thought, oh yeah, of course. There's a definite lineage there, and also, that's why I like both of them so much. But I'd never noticed that before.
And what was your initial idea for this movie? What was the spark of the idea?
Um, I think I was attracted to making a genre film because it was kind of easy to pitch.
Yeah.
After pitching Bait, which was very difficult to sort of explain what Bait was going to be. I kind of liked a lot of people said that Bait felt like it was almost a horror film at times. It had a sense of foreboding and the uncanny within it. And I thought, well, actually, maybe I could just make a straight horror film, and that'd be really easy to pitch to execs and financiers and even to an audience.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the starting point. And I think actually it might have been a mistake. And I've really shied away from calling it a horror film because I think if we call it a horror film, it might disappoint horror fans and it might put off an element of the audience who don't think they like horror films, so wouldn't even come and see it if they think it was a horror film. So I don't think it was the greatest idea calling it a horror film. But then the idea was to do something around standing stones and the sort of the sort of iconic image of a standing stone bearing down on you, and the Christian idea of what a standing stone is, a sort of petrification of a sinner. I like the idea of that, and it came from there. I mean, the original story was cooked up by myself and a writer called Adrian Bailey. We came up with the story together, and then I ended up writing the screenplay. But that was the start of it, and also writing something that was set around a set of limitations. So a single protagonist on an island, and it to be a period film. They were the sort of limitations we set ourselves, and that was the sort of starting point for it.
And how was it in the editing? Because I love when I'm watching a movie from a director I admire, and it's just got that slow, your whole opening setup of her checking the plant, going to the journal, and the repetition and mounting that. How was doing that but building the tension so slowly? You've got like a series of repetitions, but it's getting almost more eerie and unsettling as the routine passes.
That's really good fun to do in the edit because you do establish the routine. And it becomes a functional sort of structure within the film that then can be subverted to a greater lesser extent to invoke the feeling of the uncanny. And I like routine and repetition within films. I think it's really effective and it's really important to my work, and just making those slight little changes as you go through to the routine. But the routine became much more prominent. Or the film was written before the lockdown, quite a long time before the pandemic. I think by the time we got to making the film, we'd been through the 2 lockdowns. So the idea of routine being important and the structure of life had become really obvious during those lockdowns. And actually the subversion of a routine is quite unnerving. So I think that in the edit, I think a lot more of the sort of experience of the pandemic came out in the edit.
Were you thinking of the viewer in terms of how much information you're releasing as and when, and how we slowly kind of piece together the, not to give any spoilers, but piece together the bigger picture?
I think the only viewer that I think about is me when I'm watching it. I try not to think about how an audience might be reacting, because I'm only guessing if I'm thinking about an audience. So I try and do it on a just gut instinct of what I think works and doesn't work. And then I have like a few people who I do show the film to at various stages, you know, especially Denzel Monk, the producer. Mm-hmm. And I can use him as a bit of he'll have his own thoughts about it, but I can also use him as a bit of a mirror to reflect what I think I'm doing in the film and whether it's working or not. But I think it's a dangerous trap to fall into, to second guess what the audience might want.
Yeah.
But then there is a point where you put it in front of the audience and you watch it very publicly, and then it does become quite a scary moment where you do suddenly think about the audience. And for us, that was in Cannes on the 20th of May of last year, when we were in a theatre with nearly 1,000 people. Then I do start thinking about the audience, but then obviously it's too late to do anything at that point.
Yeah. And how was it pitching the Radiohead videos? Skirting the Surface looks amazing. Was that 8mm? What format was that?
That was 16. That was hand processed black and white 16mm negative. And I actually made a developer from the water that we took out of the mine, the location we filmed in. I took the water out of the mine and created the developer using that water with all of the minerals in it. So that was, that was for the Smile. So the
Smile, yeah.
Radiohead offshoot. Tom Skinner joining Johnny Greenwood and Tom York. Yeah, no, it was good. I mean, they approached me and said they wanted to do something. So we were going to do something. Well, they approached me first when we were just about to shoot ENYS MAN. So I said I couldn't do anything because I had a movie to shoot. And then they came back about a year later and said, you know, you got any time now? And I'd filmed in that location for ENYS MAN. We'd filmed one scene in the mine. So I said to them, they sent me the song, and I said, I haven't got any sort of narrative ideas or anything. And they said, great, we don't want any narrative ideas. I said, but I have got a location, which is this mine that we spent a bit of time in. I'd like to shoot something in the mine. So we did that, and I wrote this sort of scenario of this miner working underground, and then suggested that Tom York played the miner, and he had to think about it for a few days, and came back and said he was up for it. And so came down, and we shot that February last year during a huge storm where we were underground in complete peace, but above ground the whole of West Penwith was being blown to pieces. So it was that was a great experience. But it was so easy because they approached me, you know. So I wasn't pitching for it. I had to pitch an idea, and they had to go with it. But they'd already expressed an interest to work with me, so I knew that they knew what I was about, so I could relax and just pitch something that I wanted to do.
And which came first, that or the Smoke video?
We did the Smoke first. The Smoke was going to actually be the main music video with the idea for the shooting in the mine.
Yeah.
And then we ran out of time, so I did a hand-scratched music
kind of Stan
video.
Brakhage kind of look.
Yeah. So I did that, and then Tom sent me the Skating on the Surface track. And I just said, well, this fits the original idea we had in the mine even better than it did for the Smoke. Mm-hmm. So we did that one, adapted it a little bit, but then we did that one.
I played a biker in Leo Lee's video for Free and the Knowledge for the Smile.
Right.
I don't know if you saw that one where it's almost like the 60s commune looking video. That's almost like found footage.
That feels a little bit like
it feels almost horror. It always feels like a Manson family commune.
Yeah.
Where a guy's coming out and it's almost like with fragments of like the almost like fragments of a bad trip coming through.
Yeah, no, I love that. I actually I messaged Tom after I saw that to say how much I love that video.
Yeah, Leo rang me and said, "Do you want to play a Hell's Angel biker for the day?" So I went and did that for the day, which was super fun being on set. And
yeah, it's such a great album,
works.
isn't it?
It's so great. Yeah. One thing I need to end on that's been really confusing me on the BFI interview, they asked you, "What's your comfort film?"
Mm-hmm.
And you said The Perfect Storm.
Yeah.
What is comforting about a biological disaster film of a vessel being lost at sea?
I know, really bad taste, isn't it?
with the whole cast dying.
Yeah, I know, and not just the whole cast, but the real people. I think it's not to do with the subject matter. It's just
Is it the fishing world of
yeah? I mean,
I
love seeing the fishing world on the screen. And that film isn't without authenticity problems, but it comes from brilliant source material, which is Sebastian Junger's book. I think it's technically brilliant the way it's put together. I think that what I love about that film is, leaving aside the subject matter, which it is a bit twisted, so it's my comfort film when you think of the subject matter. But I think it's like a big narrative Hollywood commercial blockbuster that I'd love, which reminds me that I'm not just into obscure stuff, that there are big commercial films that I love, and I love the humanity of that film. It is obviously a tragedy, but I do think in a lot of ways it's kind of uplifting. I find it quite difficult to articulate, and I got really obsessed with that book when it came out, and I actually went to Gloucester to the location on a sort of pilgrimage, and went all the way to the Crow's Nest pub where it's sort of set, where the crew of the sword boat used to hang out and drink. And I got all the way to the pub and got to the door and then didn't go in because I just suddenly thought, what am I doing here? This is really mawkish thing to be doing. And I didn't go in. And I think it's the film I've probably seen the most ever. When it came out, I really wanted to hate it. I went to see it Holloway Odeon when I was living in London. I went to see it and thought, oh, this is going to be terrible. It's going to be a Hollywood representation of a fishing community. And I went in there and watched it and thought, oh, this is rubbish. This is awful. This is awful. And came out, people said, what was it like? Oh, no, it was terrible. But I watched it again and I liked it. I think I liked it the first time I saw it. And when we were shooting bait, about 3 days into the shoot, the weather came in and we were shut down, and it was like, oh God, this film's going to be a disaster because we're not going to get the stuff we need because the southeasterly storms come in. I remember going back to the house we were staying in and watching The Perfect Storm during a storm and watching this story of these people and thinking, well, yeah, things are going bad on this film that we're trying to make, but at least we're not on the Grand Banks in October in a small boat with storms colliding above us. And I think that was maybe what I was getting at when I found it comforting.
Yes. Okay. That makes perfect sense.
It reminds me that filmmaking isn't life or death.
That's a great line to end on. That's perfect. Okay. Well, quickly, what are you up to next? What have you got projects in mind? Have you got a dream project you want to do, or anything you can talk about?
Funnily enough, the next film we're sort of pitching as a cross between The Perfect Storm and Quantum Leap. It's like a ghost ship time travel saga that we'll hopefully shoot it next year. We were kind of thinking maybe we'll shoot it at the end of this year, but I think it's going to be too tight, so we'll probably shoot it next year. So that's all seems to be going in the right direction. I've got a dream project that we've got a meeting about on Monday, which is about an adaptation, which is kind of very uncertain at the moment. Unlikely that it will happen, just because of the likelihood of getting the rights to the source material. But that's a dream project. But we've put together a team to do that, and if it doesn't happen on this project, we'll do something else with that team. So it will still be a bit of a dream project. It's just whether we get the rights to this source material or not. But we'll know more in the next few weeks.
Are you still thinking your way of shooting, 16 mil, no sound, or
Yep,
no compromise? Fantastic.
always.
Great.
Yeah. Always for the time being.
Yeah. This has been so great. So exciting talking to you. You're such a refreshing and unique filmmaker.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, thanks for reaching out, and it's a pleasure to chat and to be on the podcast.
Thank you. Best of luck with all your future stuff.
Yeah, and good luck with everything you're doing.
Cheers, buddy. Take care.
Right on. Cheers.
Boom! That was me and Mark Jenkin. What a crazy guy. What a great guy. Really enjoyed that chat. Thanks to you guys for listening, and we will speak soon.